Good morning, everyone. If this is your first panel for the day, welcome to the Bangalore Literature Festival. So glad to have you. Should be a great day of interesting discussions, including this one, The Past is a Country, Families in Fiction. It's a powerhouse panel, and I'm going to give very brief bios, but I encourage you to read their full bios. It's all available on the LitFest websites. But Dr. Nguyen Phan Mai is the author of 12 books, including The Mountain Sings and Dust Child. Has international bestsellers that have won multiple awards. And we're very glad to have her. She's also the global ambassador of Room to Read, an organization that aims to erase global illiteracy and promote girls' education. Amit Chaudhuri is the author of 8 novels, the latest of which is Sojourn. He's also a poet, essayist, short story writer, and musician. He's won countless awards, and they're all available on the LitFest website. He's the professor of creative writing and director of the Center for the Creative and Critical at Ashoka University. And he is also recently, Faber released his full backlist of titles in the UK. And the New York Review of Books Classics imprint has reissued his last 3 novels. So thank you so much, Amit. Kiran Desai was born in India in 1971 and moved to the United States when she was 17. Her first novel, Hullabaloo in the Guava Orchard, won a 1998 Betty Trask Award, and her second, The Inheritance of Loss, won the 2006 Man Booker Prize for Fiction. Romesh Gunesekera is an internationally acclaimed writer of novels and short stories, including the Booker shortlisted Reef and Noontide Toll, a cycle of linked stories capturing vital moments in post-war Sri Lanka. He was a judge for the 2024 International Booker Prize. We're going to begin this morning's session with very brief readings and recitations from each of our panelists, and then we'll get into the discussion, which is why I know most of us are here. But I think it helps to set the tone nicely to have some brief readings. And we're going to start with Mai, if you're ready. Please take us away.
Good morning, everyone. How are you today? I'm so honored to be here, to be, among these wonderful writers whom I have admired for years. And I must tell you how much I love India. And yesterday I told myself I could live here. I could live here. Yesterday I went to the market and got these flowers, and I talked to the wonderful women of India, and I thought about my mom. My mom sold ice cream on the street, so I could be here today. So could you like to hear a poem about my mom? Yes. Should I read it in Vietnamese first or English first? Vietnamese, okay, you got it. Gian bếp của mẹ. Qua đôi mắt tuổi thơ tôi nhìn mẹ tôi tất tả trong gian bếp được dựng lên bằng rơm và bùn quánh. Mẹ nhấc lũa đen quấy nắng vào nồi cơm đang sôi. Vạt áo mẹ đậm hương thơm của mùa gặt mới. Tay mẹ mớm rơm khô cho ngọn lửa đói bập bùng. Tôi muốn đứng cạnh bên và giúp mẹ, nhưng đứa trẻ trong tôi kéo tôi chui vào góc bếp tối thẳm. Từ nơi đó, tôi nhìn gương mặt mẹ dạy vẻ đẹp cách bừng lên trong gian khổ và cách hát cho cơm sôi bằng đôi tay dám nắng của người. Ngày hôm đó, trong gian bếp của tuổi thơ tôi, sự hoàn hảo được sắp đặt bằng những chiếc nồi đen tuyền bồ hong và bởi chiếc lưng khom của mẹ mỏng manh trông chênh sẽ biến mất nếu tôi khóc hay kêu lên. My mother's rise. Through the eyes of my childhood, I watched my mother, who labored in a kitchen built from straw and mud. She lifted a pair of chopsticks and twirled sunlight into a pot of boiling rice. The perfume of a new harvest soaked her worn shirt as she bent and fed rice straw to the hungry flames. I wanted to come and help, but the child pulled myself into the dark corner where I could watch my mother's face, teach beauty how to glow in hardship and how to sing the rice to cook with her sun-baked hands. That day in our kitchen, I saw how perfection was arranged by soot-blackened pans and pots, and by the bent back of my mother, so thin she would disappear if I wept or cried out. Thank you so much. Thank you for gifting us with your time and your presence. I think being part of this festival is one of the highlights of my writing career. Thank you.
Oh. I'm also so honored to be here, but Kema, what a stunning and riveting performance. Very difficult to follow you and sit boringly to read in front of all of you, but I'm going to do just that and read from my last book, alas, not from my new one, but all day the colors had been those of dusk, mist moving like a water creature across the great flanks of mountains possessed of ocean shadows and depths. Briefly visible above the vapor, Kanchenjunga was a far peak whittled out of ice, gathering the last of the light, a plume of snow blown high by the storms at its summit. Zai, sitting on the veranda, was reading an article about a giant squid in an old National Geographic. Every now and then, she looked up at Kanchenjunga, observed its wizard phosphorescence with a shiver. The judge sat at the far corner with his chessboard, playing against himself. Stuffed under his chair, where she felt safe, was Mutt the dog, snoring gently in her sleep. A single bald light bulb dangled on a wire above. It was cold, but inside the house, it was still colder. The dark, the freeze, contained by stone walls several feet deep. Here at the back, inside the cavernous kitchen, was the cook, trying to light the damp wood. He fingered the kindling gingerly for fear of the community of scorpions living, loving, reproducing in the pile. Once he'd found a mother, plump with poison, 14 babies on her back. Eventually the fire caught, and he placed his kettle on top, as battered, as encrusted as something dug up by an archaeological team, and waited for it to boil. The walls were singed and sodden, garlic hung by muddy stems from the charred beams. Thickets of soot clumped bat-like upon the ceiling. The flame cast a mosaic of shiny orange across the cook's face, and his top half grew hot, but a mean gust tortured his arthritic knees. Up through the chimney and out, the smoke mingled with the mist that was gathering speed, sweeping in thicker and thicker, obscuring things in parts, half a hill, then the other half. The trees turned into silhouettes, loomed forth, were submerged again. Gradually, the vapor replaced everything with itself. Solid objects with shadow, and nothing remained that did not seem molded from or inspired by it. Zai's breath flew from her nostrils in drifts, and the diagram of a giant squid, constructed from scraps of information, scientists' dreams, sank entirely into the murk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kiran. Please, Amit.
ready to go, more or less prepared. Okay, I'll just very quickly contextualize this to connect it to the theme of today's discussion, which is what the past is a country or a foreign country?
The past is a country.
Okay, so it's not as if I've been searching for a connection, but here is a page from my seventh novel, Friend of My Youth, which is about a writer who is coincidentally called Amit Chaudhuri, and has also written a novel, as I have, called The Immortals. Now, he's gone back to Bombay in 2011, a Bombay which has been changed by what happened, you know, the 26/11 attacks, all of that. His main concern is, though, that he cannot access his oldest friend who lives in Bombay, who has gone to rehab outside Bombay. So this is the friend of my youth. He cannot see for the first time, and he misses as an absence in Bombay. He's gone there to read from the Immortals. He's staying in a club, and the club looks out upon, on the back, the building in which he grew up. So it's looking out on that building. So while he waits for a journalist to arrive to interview him, he goes and walks around. So I'm just going to read out that section. I decide to walk up the stairs to my room and glimpse through the latticed wall the building in which I grew up. It isn't as if I'd forgotten it. It's just that I see no point in looking at it directly. I know it exists at the back of the club, but it's a surprise to chance this morning on its continuance. The time's 10:15. The journalist will be here soon. It's that dead time when you're waiting for something that's neither entirely productive nor significant, but is supposed to be necessary. While you wait, you can neither write, nor think of writing, nor of the last book or the one you're embarked on, nor go shopping. I defer returning to the room. I step out into the driveway. Lazily, I let my eyes go over that familiar width and height. It needs a coat of paint. It's never departed its first color scheme, white and mustard. I was 8 when we moved there. I looked down from the balcony every day in times of boredom or unhappiness, or those long stretches when I was liberated from unhappiness. To look down is unlike looking up. You encompass what you see. You can make a journey, as I did with my eyes, to Nariman Point, where my father's office was. To look is to dream, or it's to relive with dread a physical journey, as I did on Sundays, tracing with my eyes the curve of the Marine Drive to Churchgate, my daily school route. The eye covers distances in a second. It lusts for freedom. Looking out, I often wanted to be free, not of home, but of the city. The eye, if it's gazing upon something it's unhappy with, as I was, might see nothing. Looking up is different. I have the freedom I then wanted. I'm free of Bombay. I have no home here. Looking up is hard work. Before long, you encounter an intolerable brightness or emptiness. I squint and count the floors. 1, 2, 3, 4. I was on the 12th. 6, 7. I think I counted the same floor twice. I start again. Then my gaze alights on a balcony. I'm not sure it's the right one. Anyway, there's no mark to identify it with. I strain to see. My home. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. Romesh, please close us out.
Can you hear me on this? Yes, you can. I'm going to read you just one page from the book that Raghav mentioned, Noontide Toll. I don't have the book, but here's the card. I have a piece of paper which should be the first page. I hope it is. Context not necessary, except to say what he said. It's post-war Sri Lanka, a couple of years after. This section is called Full Tank. Every time I drive across the causeway to Jaffna, I feel I'm entering another country. The lagoon is as big as a sea. The sky touches it at the edge, on the left, and on the right. And the wind makes the ripples look like waves. The fellows at the checkpoint know me so well now that they don't even look at my ID. They crack a couple of jokes about the state of my van and laugh their heads off. I tell them, it's a Japanese van. In 1945, Japan was a dump. Nobody thought the Japanese could make even a cup of tea anymore. But now, Toyota is the biggest car company in the world. It's a funny business, I tell them. No one knows who will have the last laugh. Mrs. Curé and two Hollanders are in my van. I get some odd balls in here, but this is the oddest trio in a while. Mrs. Curé from the New Heritage Agency is in charge. The hotel she's booked for the night is off Hospital Street. It's an okay place, but I can't help thinking, we're in a land where every road seems to lead to a hospital. We start tomorrow at 8 o'clock, Vasanta, Mrs. Curé says, standing under a bowl of fuzzy light. Out in the garden, I hear an owl hoot. It must mean something, but I'm too tired to remember. All I know is that with a van, at least you're never stuck. You're on the move. There's always hope. Thank you.
Thank you all for reading. I think it sets the tone nicely for the following discussion. You know, it's a real treat today. We have four incredible writers who are widely published. Their work has seeped into the culture, and their novels sweep across continents. They cover major historical events of the 20th century, all have a remarkable facility with language, all adept and write with psychological precision. So I'm very much looking forward to what they have to say about the past, about families, and about writing. All four of you, your work touches on families, separation, longing. And often these are entwined in each of your works with political turbulence. It may be the backdrop against which your characters are just trying to live their lives. But I want to start with you, Kiran, if you don't mind. How do these external conflicts relate to the internal family dynamics of characters?
Well, thank you for that question. It's really lovely for me because I actually have a family member in the audience. My uncle is here. And it's lovely to be talking about his parents, my grandparents, who I was privileged to know as a child. I never knew my mother's parents at all. But when I was writing Inheritance and while I was working on the book that I just finished, just before coming to this festival, in fact, a few days before coming, a lot of it has been trying to draw emotional and historical patterns between their time and my time. And it isn't as if they spoke about the politics of the time so much, but it was obvious that their entire lives had been transformed by it. And I was really led by the mystery of the past, as if, I wondered as if they were masquerading as normal because they couldn't possibly be normal having gone through what they had gone through, which is what all our grandparents went through. They were born in British India, went through the independence movement, partition. And while exploring these subjects, including, what we are seeing in politics today, I really sort of began to, wonder about whether how the person links to the politics, whether what happens in a family is not dissimilar to what happens to a nation. So what happens in a dictatorship running on fear may not be so different what happens within a family running on fear. And what I also became interested in is how certain emotions, primitive emotions like shame, like wounded pride, like fear, one of the basic tenets of human rights would be to live a life without fear. What happens when that is overturned? And how do those emotions manifest in a personal sphere within the household and how in a political sphere? So that's very much how my books have been constructed, following those threads.
Wonderful, thanks. Before I extend it out and ask the rest of you, just congratulations on finishing the book, and we're looking forward
to it. Big relief. I think it's been 15 or 20 years. It's not count.
And but I would like to extend the same question outwards, since whether it's 2611, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, I mean, the backdrop of turbulence, I'm sure you have thoughts. Romesh, okay, Mai.
I thank you, Kiran, for sharing your thoughts. I need to admit that when I was trying to become a writer in English, I read The Inheritance of Loss. So, it's a full circle down here today. I feel so honored. And I think in reading, Kiran's work about an Indian family, I saw my own family in it. That's the beauty of literature. We see the humanity of everywhere on earth. We are more similar than we are different. And I think, that's why literature is really the weapon for peace. In my novel, The Mountain Sing, Hương, a young girl, told herself this: if everyone is willing to read literature from other countries and see the light of other culture, there would be no war on earth. And I think I wish that politicians could read more, right? Yes. I wish politicians could get to know the humanity of the countries they are going to bomb, of the families they are going to kill. They could think twice about killing these people, because the weapons for wars is, the dehumanization. I interviewed an American soldier, an American veteran, who told me that on his plane to Vietnam, his commander told him, don't worry about killing the Vietnamese. They had been at war with other nations for centuries. They don't value life like us Americans. Can you believe that if you Google, you could see, this documentary of a commander, of a former commander of the U.S. forces in Vietnam, who said this in a documentary: life is cheap in the Orient. And I wrote about this in my novel, Dust Child. And I think, I wrote about the history of Vietnam, and I wanted to see history via the lives of Vietnamese people. I wanted to show that Vietnamese are like Indians, Vietnamese are like Americans, like any other nations on earth. We love our family, we want peace, we want to live a normal life. And I think this humanity, this brings us together. So thank you for being here to celebrate our common humanity with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Khoi Mai. I think, Romesh, you've written about Sri Lanka and how when normalcy is interrupted. And yeah, it's just the same question about the backdrop of external conflict.
That's not quite the same question. There's a question of backdrop, and there's a question of the link between the personal and the political, I guess. Those are two different things. Neither of which are usually in my mind when I'm trying to write something. When I'm trying to write something today, I'm no different from when I was trying to write something when I was 17 or 16 or whenever it was. The great difficulty was trying to get the words to come out of my head or into my head and then onto a piece of paper. And really, I guess these other issues are just what we live with. I think when I had my first couple of books written, there was a lot of turbulence, political turbulence, but there's always political turbulence, as there is now. The difference was whether it affects you as a person and whether it affects the characters you're thinking about. And in my case, both happened, I suppose, at a crucial moment in my writing life, which was perhaps in the early 80s when after years and years of trying to write something, suddenly I was managing to finish a story, finish a poem, finish something. And I remember possibly the key moment was actually the first story that actually had some real publication possibilities. It was being published in a magazine in England. And in the course of writing that story, the world of Sri Lanka changed radically. And this was in 1983 when call it what you like, pogrom, riots, violence was unleashed in a way that no one imagined was possible in a place like that. And so in a sense, the politics invaded my story. I had to make sense of this story, which was nothing to do with it. It was written before it happened, but I had got to the last page and I hadn't finished it when all this happened. And I thought, I have to, in my own little way, not involved in any of that, try and understand how it works. This was pre-internet era, news was different, but the news was all over the place. I remember London, 1 week the buses had tourist posters of Sri Lanka. The next week, it was news of all the bloodshed. And so a story, it was a story called Storm Petrel, actually. It's in my first book. Had to deal with that for myself. But subsequently, I remember in audiences, people saying, 2 questions used to come up. Why so much politics in your story? The next question is, why isn't there more politics in your story? So it kind of works both ways. The piece I read out from Noontide Toll was very special. That was one where maybe the same things was happening, but I did have an intention. I wanted to write about that moment immediately after the end of the war, partly because I didn't live in Sri Lanka. Despite the end of the war, there was quite a sense of forbearing. People didn't want to voice anything that might be dissentful or questioning, but I felt I could. But more importantly, also, I noticed language was changing, and the way people saw the world was changing. And I often say, Noontide Toll, the word toll tells everything. The word toll at that time meant the toll of death. From the war, from the tsunami, all sorts of things. But in the course of this book, my van driver, and the book wrote itself because I just wrote one story about a van driver, and I just liked him so much that I just continued, and it just went on and on and on. But in the course of his life, in those 2 years after the end of the war, the word itself would have changed its meaning, because after the end of the war, we had our first highways built in Sri Lanka. The first toll plazas were built. And so the word toll became what you pay to get onto the highway. And I just was interested the way the language changes, the context changes, the way we think about the world changes.
Thanks so much, Romesh. Appreciate that. Amit, would like to get your thoughts on this same question of the personal and the political, and also anything you'd like to jump off from what's been said so far.
Well, a few things. One is grappling with a number of things. When you're writing a novel or writing any kind of imaginative work, whether it's a novel or a poem or an essay, one of the things is, for me, and to the kind of writing I respond, whatever the writer might say about their writing, I'm talking about the responding and thinking about writing itself, and not about what writers say about the writing. They might say, well, I wanted to write about war, I wanted to write about this. is that in a text that works for me, nothing is central to it. One has to find a way of holding in balance several moments and encounters with several moments. There cannot be one exclusive central moment in a piece of imaginative writing or filmmaking. So this is what one is dealing with. I mean, that one has a subject matter that one is driven by, but there is no center around which it congeals as a theme or a story. The whole point of writing is to see that idea unravel through what Wordsworth called mild shocks of surprise from line to line. Those mild shocks of surprise happen because the idea of some pre-given, prefabricated theme unravels. The writer cannot work with it. The writer is consistently surprised, as is the reader. So there are books I've written where one of the impetuses would have been political, like Freedom Song. The Babri Masjid came down. That was one of the impetuses. I was walking around Calcutta, which is far away from where all of that had happened. I saw the lotus on the wall. And I thought, the way I'm looking at the lotus has now changed. Everything has changed, including the winter. The experience of changed meaning, whether it's political or not, whatever name you give to it, is itself unsettling and leads to this world which we call the novel. So I'd already entered, before writing a word, the novel, because of this changed frame that I experienced around me. Once I began to write it in words, of course, it was not going to be just about that. It was going to be about also the availability of oranges in the winter and what it means to eat those oranges. So that's one thing I just wanted to add here. I think for me, the primary political event by which I was shaped, and everybody here has been shaped, at least I think, both as writers and readers, is the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dominance of free market globalization as the one reality in which we now live. When I was growing up, none of us thought that this would happen. And so we lived in a world of binaries and dichotomies, or alternative realities. The validity of alternative realities went away once the Berlin Wall fell. And now the way we think about events such as this, about writing, about the way I think about my next book, or my publisher would like to think about my next book, is specific to the aftermath of a political event. It didn't exist before. We thought about writers' books very differently before that political event. So this is another thing to take on board as part of what writers should be, which is self-reflexive.
Thanks, Amit. Excellent point, I think, about the commercial imperative. I think it would be helpful for writers if we had a calendar of next year's political events so we could plan out ahead. We have 10 minutes left, but there's an important question I wanted to ask Khoi Mai about your work, because when you read her work, there are tone marks on the Vietnamese language, and for us readers in India, we may not be familiar with these. And I wanted to ask you about the decision to do this, and also what do these mean in terms of family names, and how do we use language perhaps to mediate our understandings of family?
Thank you so much. Before I answer, I need to hide because Raghav introduced us. So I should say that you should all come to his event at 3 o'clock today, where he's going to launch his amazing novel, Missy. So he traveled all the way from Chicago here and has done so much for us. So thank you so much. Once I went to the public library in New York and I saw the list of all the books published in English about Vietnam. And I was shocked to find out that most of these books have been written by Westerners about Vietnam, about the Vietnam War. And we Vietnamese people appear as the background to the Western story. So I wanted to use the English language as a weapon to decolonize literature about Vietnam. I could have sold many more books if I had conformed to the Western rule of publication by abbreviating my name into 2 words and leaving out the tonal marks. But my name, Nguyen Phan Quế Mai, is very hard to pronounce, so I miss out on readers. But I think it's important to show the appreciation of the Vietnamese language. So, for example, my name, can you say Quế? Quế? So Quế appears here, right? Quế means cinnamon. So my parents named me cinnamon, an ingredient of the Vietnamese traditional medicine, so I could always stay healthy. They're so smart, right? But if I were to conform to the Western publishing standard, I could leave out the tonal marks. So my name would become Que. Can you say Que? Que. Que means a stick. So from cinnamon, I would become a stick. So I didn't like that. So I asked my publisher to always keep the tonal marks of all my characters' names. So, I have the family book, the family tree in my book, and all of the names are written in the full tonal marks. And by accepting them, you show the appreciation for the Vietnamese culture and Vietnamese language, and you help to decolonize literature about Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And of course, you should all get their books and get them signed after as well. But I wonder if we have time for any audience questions or how. Are there any questions from the audience? I think we have one in the middle.
Kiran ma'am, my question is to you. Am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you, but just put it closer.
So I met you at JLF 2011, and back then you told us that you had some 1,500 pages of unpublished work on your laptop. So I just got here like 2 minutes late, and I heard you mentioning that you finally finished the book you've been working on for 15 years. Does this happen to be the same book by any chance? Just out of curiosity.
It's the same book, you're right. I must have been working on it really for almost ever since I published Inheritance of Loss. But I also think I wasn't really thinking in terms of a novel. I was creating a body of work that I could use into the future. And it was a long while before I could see the shape of a novel coming through all of those pages. And it's been a long journey, but in a way, I think I'm grateful to have been able to exit the world for all of these years and just work on a book. And it will be published next year.
That's music to my ears.
It's called The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny. Thank you for your question.
This question is for Mr. Amit. Have you written about Calcutta?
He has written a lot
Because
of very...
I have translated one of your short stories. You mentioned an uncle there.
Yeah.
That I have translated into Kannada.
There are two uncles in my work, and they keep recurring. Yeah, the first book was about an uncle, Estranged and Subliminal.
Yes,
So-
one of
Sahitya
my
Academy
favorite books.
publication. Sahitya Academy publication.
I'm very glad to know that. Yeah, thank you.
So my question is about storytelling and the content of story. You have
Sorry,
made
storytelling?
rejection of story and storytelling.
Yeah,
Have you made some points about that?
right. I'm going to make some points at 3:30 today, where I'll be speaking against storytelling.
No,
Yeah.
Can you tell in 2-3
I know this is a very good pitch for my book, but all my work. But anyway, again, storytelling. Yes.
I read it in the scroll.
All right.
In
Okay.
a store.
But how can
Excuse me.
scroll in that?
Yes. Again, storytelling is.
But
is
how,
just- yes.
how can you reject storytelling?
For me, everything that's interesting happens outside on the fringes of story. That's why, for me, the first pages of a novel are the first paragraphs where there is still no commitment to story. The writer is setting the scene. You encounter a world in the first two paragraphs or the first two pages. Afterwards, what is what is the protagonist going to do? Where has he come from? All those compulsions of narrative take over, but not in the first two pages. That's why the first two pages or the first two paragraphs, which cover what's on the fringes of story, work for me as the most exciting bits of a novel. My solution to this is to write a novel or to write novels that are composed primarily of opening paragraphs. So as to always be able to capture what's outside the story and never get into that thing about, okay, then what happened? What happened next to the protagonist? For me, everything, the encounter with life itself is far more interesting than anything that a story can tell us. And that encounter with life is mostly in novels on the fringes of what's happening to the protagonist. Again, a very good pitch for my work.
Can I? I know, I'm sorry for intruding. This is not a question, it's a comment to Kai Mai's presentation. We were recently in Vietnam, my wife and I, and two things stood out. One is the myth, the blowing of the myth, the Western myth that communist world is very oppressive and you're watched from all corners by people. We never saw anything of that sort, and people were very happy and going about their business like any other country. The second, probably more touching, was to learn from the Vietnamese that there is no rancor left in your people. There were any number of American tourists, and even when we went through all those tunnels to see what was happening in those good old or bad old days, there was no hatred. I think it's a lesson probably countries like us and many others could take on from Vietnam. And thank you very much for bringing it all in your book. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your comment. How many of you have been to Vietnam? Wow, amazing. I love you. For those who have not been to Vietnam, please go. It's very affordable, close to India, and you will enjoy the food, the landscape, the culture, the hospitality. I would love for you to go, and thank you for saying that you enjoy your trip to Vietnam. I think we have issues in Vietnam. For example, censorship. Writers cannot write about anything we want. We have issues, but of course we have Vietnamese people are like Indians. We are hopeful. We work hard for our families, for our future, and we believe that we can rebuild our life, our destiny. We can be in control of our destiny. So I hope you can feel that spirit and that energy in Vietnam when you visit Vietnam, as I can feel now when I'm in India. Thank you.